David Sanger. Cyber, in some sense, could be a prelude to a conflict. In other words, your first step might be to disable their power systems, that sort of thing, whatever. Or, in essence, can be a substitute for that.
That's right. It could be a prelude, a substitute, or the beginning and the end.
Right.
Because if you can stop a country from communicating with its military forces, you might have finished off the war as it started.
Before it even starts. So when I started to think about cyber and look at it, my mind immediately went to sort of the lexicon of nuclear weapons and all the concepts that around there, including things like deterrence and mutual assured destruction and even arms control. These are all sort of things that were sort of constructs, I think, that are in the military mind and certainly in military strategists' mind. And is there a danger that people have sort of looked at those constructs, used those sort of mental maps, and tried to apply them to cyber? Because it seems to me the more I got into it, the less parallels there were on sort of every level.
That's right. All the questions that come up in nuclear deterrence are the same as the questions that come up in cyber, and every one of the answers is different. And following the analogy too slavishly can really send you down some wrong rabbit holes. I was trained by, among others, the great Ernie May, who was a professor at Harvard, who wrote a wonderful book called Thinking in Time about the uses and misuses of historical analogy. And as I was working on this book, one of the things I was trying to figure out was, where do the nuclear analogies apply and where don't they? So let me give you one where they apply, and then we can go into where they don't. The one where it applies is that this is a technology that is more than just another weapon. It is, because it is so cheap, because it is so available, because it is now spread to 30 or 40 countries, it is actually changing the balance of power in the world today. And people forget that when they are reading these headlines about stolen healthcare data or stolen OPM data or a steel mill that got wiped out. They're forgetting that, yeah, we're the collateral damage, but in a much broader strategic war that's going on at 30,000 feet above our heads. And then the question is, how does this actually change that balance of power? Well, in the nuclear world, it took us decades to figure that out. And Henry Kissinger didn't write Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy until 12 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right.
And then there was another 15 or 20 years of debating how we wanted to use nuclear weapons. And in the 50s, we were talking about using it against the North Koreans, the Chinese, and the Korean War. By the 1980s, we had concluded we would only use a nuclear weapon as a matter of national survival. Complete 180-degree turn. In cyber, we're just beginning to have that debate. So nuclear is a useful tool to remind us that even in the most classified of weapons, you can still have a very public debate about how you want to use it. And we haven't even made that leap. Now, where's it misleading? It's misleading because the weapon is not just available to states. It's available to terror groups, criminal groups, teenagers. So the whole idea that you're going to sign arms control treaties, forget it. Not going to happen. You might get some norms of behavior. You're not going to get the kind of treaties that we saw in the nuclear age.
There's also a great phrase which I had not heard before, but you used in your book, which I guess is in common parlance among people who in the know about cyber, but it's left of launch.
Yep.
The idea that you would have a preemptive strike on an opponent's weaponry using what they call non-kinetic means. Now, this is an important distinction, I think, for our audience, which is that we always draw a distinction between kinetic warfare, which is when you actually blow things up in the physical world, and everything else. And so cyber is considered a non-kinetic means of...
Although you can use cyber to begin to blow some things up.
Right.
Ask the Iranians. They learned this lesson the hard way. Yeah.
Yes. Now, that's why it's also new. There is a point at which you're using cyber, you can cause bad things to happen in the physical world, right? But so this left of launch idea, explain to us what that is and why that's important.
If you think of the traditional missile defense, it's a missile gets launched, we try to intercept it, it may blow up, it may not, But after it's launched, you're dependent completely on your statistical chances of intercepting it in space. Left of launch is an effort to try to increase your chances by sabotaging the missile before it leaves the launch pad or in the first seconds after it does. And it can be everything from moving in bad parts into their supply chain so that they will fail, to moving in bad software, to getting inside the command and control system so that when it does launch, it gets a series of signals that makes it go awry, blows it up, and so forth. We started getting into it when Bill Broad and I noticed that the Musadon missile, which was an intermediate range missile that the North Koreans were firing with significant rapidity back in 2015, 2016, mostly in 2016, was having a failure rate of 88% for what was a fairly mature missile program. That's a very high failure rate for something that's sort of a well-understood missile. Lots of people blow stuff up,
right,
including us, early in their programs.
Right.
But eventually they work out the kinks. So we looked at this and we said, there's got to be a better explanation. Now, we can't tell what percentage of those failed launches was due to the cyber element of this and what was due to bad parts and what was due to the North Koreans just making mistakes. But it's clear it had some effect.
But these are preemptive strikes. In
absolutely.
Military, or preventive strikes.
Right.
Slight distinction there, but I suppose if you made an argument, well, if it were something that as the missile were being moved into position and you knew they were going to use it, that's a preventive strike. But if it's really a change in doctrine, and it's not within international law in terms of
no, it is well out of that because you are striking first. Now right, there is a doctrine of preemption.
Right.
If you believe you are,
and it's important to point out that the U.S. has never said they wouldn't strike preemptively.
That's right.
We have not had. We don't have a no first strike policy, but this was against. Important.
These were also against test flights. Mm-hmm. They weren't. It would be one right, thing if you thought they were loading up a nuclear weapon right, aimed at California, and then you would be on pretty firm international legal ground about taking it out before it launched. You probably also wouldn't trust that to a cyber strike. You probably would
right,
just go blow it up the old-fashioned way because your risk was so high. But this takes us into a new territory, partly because of the legal issues that you raise, which we could do separate discussion and broadcast on, but partly because of the precedent that it sets. So we don't think the North Koreans can do a whole lot to our nuclear systems, but supposing we have established in the minds of the Russians and the Chinese that using cyber against another country's nuclear command and control is fair game. Now, they may have thought that anyway.
Right.
But you're certainly reinforcing it once you've done that program against the North Koreans. And there are a lot of vulnerabilities to our own systems. I mean, the main thing that saved our nuclear system so far is that the computing is so old in the command and control system right, that we're actually relatively safe. But as we modernize those systems, we're going to end up putting in software that's got significant vulnerabilities because all new software has significant vulnerabilities.
Right.
So interesting question, do you want to go down this road knowing that one day it could be turned against you? And there's a strategic stability question here. If you're doubtful that when you press that big red button that the president says he has on his desk, just like Kim Jong-un, right, and nothing happens, would that make you more tempted to press it early mm-hmm, so that you could use a backup system if nothing happened?
Right.
And so there's a question of whether or not it could make you a little bit trigger happy.
There's more information about cybersecurity, including how U.S. military strategy is evolving, on our website. Just go to realcleardefense.com and you'll get a prompt to go to our cybersecurity homepage.